Hello, everybody. This is Professor Brukas, and I'd like to welcome you to our first module of serial homicide. All right. What we're going to take a look at in this unit is what is serial killing and a few of the issues that surround serial killing. And we also kind of want to look at the fascination that the American public has with the whole genre and concept of serial homicide. But first of all, before we get started, a couple things I do want to point out as we go through this study over the next few weeks. First of all, and I'm only saying this because we have students that have tried to do this, do not attempt to contact any of the serial killers we study or attempt any sort of correspondence. Do not do this. Serial killers tend to be very manipulative and they can take advantage of people. And for the purpose of protecting your safety and your financial well-being, do not do that. All right? And again, this is something that we've had students do in the past. We've actually had one student do it, and it created a very messy situation, and it's not something that we want to see repeated. Secondly, one of the things I'm going to be harping on over and over and over again is the fact that many times we remember the serial killers, but we do not remember the victims. Victims are very, very important, and victims should not get lost in our discussion of serial killers, and we shouldn't put serial killers on a pedestal because these people are murderers. And finally, we tend to look at serial killers while they're killing and look at what happens to them in the criminal justice system when they finish. One of the things that I'd like to point out, though, is we should not ignore the possibility of preventing a problem before it starts. When dealing with mental health issues, which I think most of us would agree is an ingredient in most serial homicides, an ounce of prevention can be worth a pound of cure. And mental health services can save lives. All right. That being said, let's take a look at serial killers. All right. Yes, I'm going to use the picture of the serial killer that probably most of us have seen from Silence of the Lamb. This is none other than Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. The fact is, for some reason, as a country, and actually as a globe, I would say, we have a very uncomfortable fascination with serial killers. We tend to romanticize them to a point, and while detesting them, we also tend to admire them. And it's a concept that for some reason we just simply cannot get enough of. This is in spite of the fact that serial killers, actually murders overall, make up a very small percentage of violent crimes, and serial killing makes up even a small percentage of that. And while we have this fascination, we at the same time detest these people. On the other hand, when these individuals get caught, the first thing we want to do is find out why. We want to know how their mind thinks, and we want to build our knowledge. And so it's a very uncomfortable relationship. And the dynamic of this is something that is very hard to understand, and there's not a lot of research that has gone into this. But perhaps nowhere is this dynamic more out front and open is when we look at the dynamic that we feel serial killers are crazy, but we don't think they're insane from a legal point of view. And I think that exemplifies more than anything the contradiction that we as Americans feel about serial killing. And it's a contradiction that I think is going to weave its theme as we go through this course and we continue our study into serial homicide. Okay, so first of all, serial killing. There is one legal definition of it that came about in 1998, but by and large, serial killing is something we know it when we see it. The legal definition, by the way, is taken from the Protection of Children from Sexual Predators Act of 1998. The citation is on the slide. But the term serial killing means a series of 3 or more killings, not less than one of which was committed within the United States, having common characteristics as to suggest the reasonable possibility that crimes were committed by the same actor or actors. That said, that is the legal definition. However, there is absolutely no universal agreement on it. Most times when we as criminologists take a look at it, we will not consider somebody a serial killer until they have 4 victims. But there are some police departments and many law enforcement agencies that consider 2 people sufficient for someone to be a serial killer. The point I'm going to make here is, does this really matter? And why is that important? The fact of the matter is we're dealing with people that have died, and we're dealing with very tough situations. So I would say that every killing, whether it be a serial killing or not, is something that is important, and the lives of those victims should be remembered, and justice should be done. All right. Now, your book makes a distinction here. And yeah, I guess there's a point to it, but I really don't like it. And that's the distinction between mass murder and a serial killer. The difference between a mass murderer, which is somebody somebody like in the Columbine situation, or somebody like in the Colorado movie theater situation, or any sort of active shooter on a school campus. It's a one-time event, and this event normally ends in being shot by a police person or something, or the person commits suicide, but it ends in death of the actual shooter, the shooter or perpetrator, him. Actually, in most cases, it's himself, but in him or herself. Serial killings, in order to have the distinction of serial killings, occur over time. Now, there is some argument, there is some validity to the argument that what drives a serial killer is frequently very different from from what drives a mass murderer. That said, I really don't like this distinction, because the fact of the matter is, in both situations, a lot of people lose their lives. And to make this distinction, to be honest, I would cover both mass murder and serial killings if the definition allowed it in this course. That said, the focus of this is on serial killings, and the whole notion of mass murdering, while considered tragic, and as actually events are listed in your textbook, is something that is a subject for different study. That said, I'd be curious if you could send your professor who is instructing this course some feedback as to whether you feel whether that should be included and whether this distinction is actually necessary. All right, now, serial killings. One of the things we do when we immortalize serial killers is we tend to have this image in our heads. Now, that's not to say that, and we almost stereotype serial killers. And one of the things I think your book does an excellent job with is debunking some of those myths. First of all, no, serial killers are not alike. They are not all of the same race. We tend to think of serial killers as white. They're not all of upper class. We tend to not think serial killers come from backgrounds of poverty. Serial killers are not all males. And serial killers are, again, come from a variety of different economic circumstances. We tend to think, and this is probably immortalized more than anything else by the Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs that serial killers have above average IQs. These folks are not geniuses. Serial killers are serial killers simply because they have a compulsion to kill. Other things to keep in mind is that most serial killers have very low body counts. They either tend to get caught or they stop, but we do have serial killers that tend to have high body counts. And last but not least, one thing research has made very clear is even though serial killers may on occasion taunt law enforcement and create havoc with the media, serial killers do not want to get caught. As is the case with most individuals that are involved in criminal activity, people just simply do not want to get caught, and serial killers, by no stretch of the imagination, are any different from that. All right, and again, I'd also take a look, because your book also does break down a number of other stereotypes that we have with serial killing, and I would strongly encourage you to look at those, because the book does an absolutely excellent job with that. All right, so finally, I want to actually, in the nature of challenging stereotypes and challenging serial killers, want you to take a look at the recent scandal that involved Takata airbags and tell me whether you think the automakers, and for that matter, the executives of both the automakers and Takata who made the airbags are serial killers. And here's what happened, and you're going to want to do some reading to get some more depth on this, but Takata knew that they were manufacturing an airbag that was unsafe. And when the airbag, when there were accidents in vehicles that had the Takata airbag, many times it did not properly deploy, and the lack of its deploying resulted in many, many deaths. The reason why was the fact the company decided to save money, knowing, by the way, that it was a risk to safety, and public record does show this, knowing that it was a risk to safety, all right, but decided to save the money anyway. Now, it definitely meets the definition. We have had more, depending even the most liberal definition, most conservative definition, which is 4 people, these airbags have killed significantly more. Which brings in the whole nature of whether whether white-collar companies can be serial killers. Are tobacco companies serial killers? Are manufacturers of saturated fat serial killers? Are pharmaceutical companies that make drugs that are so expensive that people are unable to afford them serial killers because they're not providing them life-saving medications? This, I think, is a very intriguing question, and I think before we actually start reading into typologies, I think it's something that could be really interesting for us to explore. So that's what your essay is going to be about this week. So with that, I thank you very much for listening to the lecture, and again, I look forward to working with you through the rest of this course. Have a great day.